Hello, Kelly. I'm really glad that you're here with us today. So I'm Samantha, and I'm in the College Counseling and Student Development Master's Program here at St. Cloud State, and then I have a graduate assistantship through Healthy Husky. So through that graduate assistantship, as part of my role, I get to co-advise Active Minds with Charlene. So I get to work with her, which has been wonderful. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Alexis.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I'm one of the co-presidents for Active Minds, and I'm also a second-year clinical mental health counseling graduate student. It's really great to have you, Kelly. We really appreciate you coming on here to speak. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-president, Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron, and I'm the other co-president. I am a psychologist and a Spanish major, and my role in mental health is I'm currently a behavioral health technician at the St. Cloud Hospital for the adult inpatient unit. And I'll pass it on to Michael.
Hey, Kelly. My name is Mike Libby. I am just finishing up my bachelor's here in May, I believe it is, and I'll be coming back for my graduate degree in rehabilitation and addiction.
Hi, Kelly. My name is Jordan. I'm a social work student here in the bachelor's program, and I'm glad that you're here, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this topic.
Sure. Well, nice to meet everybody.
So Kelly, and as you know, I am a therapist here at the Counseling Center, and I'm also the advisor of Active Minds. And for our listeners, we are 10 years strong. We always say we're a small but mighty group. And for our listeners, we are always looking for people to join as well as join our leadership team. So Kelly, I'm just going to kind of read a little bit about you. You have incredible wealth of information, or a wealth of experience, I should say. And the topic today is about eating disorder awareness, as well as connections with mental health. And so this is, if we were not in a pandemic, we would be in Atwood, and we'd have oftentimes a whole week of eating disorder awareness activities for our students, for our campus. And so this is us kind of bringing it down to the core. And so we really knew that you were the expert that we could really know that you have a voice and a passion and great education, as well as your own personal experience that I know that you speak about. So for those of you who do not know Kelly, she's a jack of all trades. And we will continue to see more and more of Kelly in our campus and community. So she is currently the Development Director at Central Minnesota Mental Health Center. She was previously the Executive Director at Advocacy and Inclusion Matter in Wilmer, which is a nonprofit promoting inclusion and wellness program for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She volunteers all the time. She facilitated, like I said, an eating disorder support group in St. Cloud from 2009 to 2017. So, and let me highlight volunteer. And that was a weekly commitment. Was that weekly or biweekly? I think it was.
It fluctuated weekly to biweekly, depending on the need.
Yes. And so, so very, very important piece for our community. And then she has 15 years of recovery herself from anorexia. And let me throw in, she boxes. And she does a really nice job with own personal wellness. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We have several questions, and my team here want you to speak just from your expertise, from your heart. And I'm just going to kind of throw out questions. Also, my cohorts here will join in when they feel like they can. And so we're going to try to have as much of a conversation as much as possible, but also really want to give you the platform here. And so here's the first question. How did you develop a passion for bringing out awareness with people struggling with an eating disorder?
Well, actually, it was my personal experience. My eating disorder started as a freshman in college. And I didn't really seek out help until, I'd probably suffered at least a year at that point. And it was actually only outpatient that I was doing. So unfortunately, that just wasn't enough. So it progressed and it progressed all the way through graduate school until I just couldn't function anymore. And I just felt like I suffered in silence. Nobody knew what to do or say to me. I think maybe some people just thought maybe it would just go away on its own as I got older, but I just feel like, just suffering alone, not knowing anybody else in the world could understand what I was going through, especially the mental part. Obviously, it's physically painful to be that thin, but I think the mental torment is what made the struggle just so unbearable. And like I said, I just felt like I was going through it alone. But when I went into inpatient, I was actually able to see that there were other people who could relate to what was going on in my head, who had the same thoughts as I did and could understand my behaviors without judgment. So that was probably the first time where I felt like I wasn't the only anorexic in the whole world. So after going through that experience and having a stable recovery, so it wasn't right after I got out of inpatient that my recovery was one and done. It actually took a couple years after that with outpatient support and things like that. But once I got to a place where I felt like I was safe in my own recovery, I really wanted to help other people. I really did feel very fortunate. Sorry. I can get emotional when I talk about this sometimes, but
Absolutely.
I just felt so fortunate that I had the chance to recover, that I wanted other people to, have that same experience, or at least have that same hope. And like I said, because I felt so alone, I'm sure others out there that were going through the same struggle also felt alone. So what my support group was, I went through anorexia nervosa and associated disorders. It's ANAD. It's a national organization out of Chicago, the Chicago area. And they gave you toolkits as to how to start a peer support group. And I always emphasized it was not a therapy support group. I wasn't qualified to do that, but it was just to bring people to a safe place where they could talk about their feelings. I didn't want them talking about their food, their weight, or their behaviors, or anything like that. That's medical stuff. I just wanted them to feel supported by other people and feel like they had a safe space to talk about their thinking and what was going on in their heads. So the group never really got very big, which is okay. As long as it was helping whoever walked through those doors, that's all that mattered. So we had people that stayed with the group for many years throughout. Some were just there a couple years and some just a couple months, but as long as they felt safe in that space and that they weren't alone, that's what was most important to me. So,
Kelly, I think you hit the nail on the head about the eating disorders, and I'll ask you maybe a little bit about just to describe eating disorders and just to provide that psychoeducation. But first, though, it's such a private, personal secret. It's a secretive experience, and mental health is anyway because of that stigma. But eating disorders is such a personal struggle. And that for you to really focus on the emotional aspect of the people that you were trying to help, because it's what we say in our mind about our bodies, about our existence, about our worth, can be so persecutory, and without even awareness to that, and then that certainly impacts how we feel about our own body image. And you spoke about it so beautifully. And so I think about all those college students, especially now that we're, in the midst of COVID and socially isolative, how secretive, even more so, this is. And how sometimes we use food to control as a means of controlling our life, either excessively eating or restricting. So can you talk about maybe what some of our own college students might be experiencing so they can put some words to some of the things that they might be feeling and living day to day?
Yeah, what an experience to be having an eating disorder during a pandemic when we're experiencing social isolation and social distancing and just the lack of connection. Because like I mentioned, that was such a key part to me being able to get them to my road to recovery. And I think for college students too, for many of them, it's their first time away from home. It's a totally different structure for them. It's different than what they've known. And that maybe was part of why mine started as a freshman, as I was away from everything I had been so used to. And so my routines and everything were just different. But yeah, even with Zoom, and Charlene and others probably know, delivering services with telehealth and things like that, while it is great and it does have its benefits, there's just something about having that in-person connection, being able to read people's body language and, just kind of just having somebody there to talk to. For some people, though, I will say, I think the telehealth is good because the social anxiety, they can just hop on the screen and talk to people. But I feel like, I guess I don't know how I would have coped if I couldn't see my therapist or one-on-one. I think that would just be so challenging. So yeah, you really have to think about how can I stay connected? How can I reach out to people? Because I feel like if that slips or goes aside, that can be a dangerous territory to go into. So, because yeah, the loneliness, all that does is it just gives the mind the opportunity to spiral into those negative conversations. And I feel like it can just make it so much worse. I know low points for me is when I was living alone, just stopped going out with people. Yeah, so that social connection really is important, whatever that looks like, and having healthy connections as well. So,
So thank you for that. So with eating disorders, for me as a clinician, I know the diagnostic criteria. So we have anorexia, we have bulimia, we have also, with someone with excessive weight, so someone who's eating excessively, so obesity. So can you talk about, and of course, bulimia is that binging and purging, anorexia is restricting food. Can you speak about just knowing what you know in general about eating disorders? What kind of thought process does a person go through? I think about sometimes self-rejection or self-hatred or persecutory thoughts that maybe some of our listeners might not realize they're doing, and listening to it might bring up some awareness to that. And then what do we do about those?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I'll just start out by saying I didn't say one day I'm going to give myself anorexia. It was just so gradual. And by the time I had realized where I was at in my life, it was actually it felt impossible to change. I just felt like I was stuck. Because it didn't start out with me saying, oh my gosh, I feel so fat. I was an athlete throughout most of my life. Actually, my body image, I felt pretty good about it. It was actually, like you said, Charlene, it was about my self-worth. I just didn't like myself. I didn't grow up in the best home, so my self-esteem was very poor. School life, I wasn't the most popular person, we'll just put it that way. So all these negative thoughts had just compounded over the years and into my head, and just gave me the self-perception that I was not worthy. And eventually that got to the point where I don't feel worthy to eat. And also, I didn't feel worthy to live. So that's why I chose my eating disorder as my go-to, because I knew eventually if I kept doing it, that I wouldn't be around anymore. So it was just kind of my way of solving the problem of me not feeling worthy. So, but yeah, it's incredible, like all the negative thoughts. And even I'll catch myself saying in this, like today, I'll hear these voices in my head saying, you're not good at that. Or I'll even sometimes say, oh my gosh, I'm so fat, which I'm like, oh my goodness, where's that coming from? It's almost like it's automatic. But thankfully now I can, when I hear those things, I can reject them. And the process for overturning those thoughts, it's an uphill battle, I will say that. I know in AA, they say you got to fake it till you make it. And I think that's kind of the approach I took. So when I was in treatment, they actually had me list all the negative core beliefs I had about myself. And I think I had a list of 81. And how they had me start countering those was write positive thoughts on the other side of the paper. So I didn't believe those at the time. I'm like, why am I doing this? I'm never going to think that way. But it was just really going through the motions at first. So it just really took a lot of time. You have to be willing to do things that may not make sense at the time and trust people who know what they're doing, who are experts in this field. When they tell you should do these activities, just have a lot of faith in doing it. But yeah, it was a lot of work to get all those negative voices out of my head. But the first step was getting them out of my head. So putting them on paper, talking about it, which was not an easy thing to do. Because the voices were pretty nasty. And actually, I say voices plural. It was actually just one voice.
Yeah. Your internal thoughts.
Yes. It's just it's hard to explain. It's just one of those things, that the voice isn't real, but it just feels so real. And it's just so controlling. It just kind of feels like something comes inside your head and takes over. It's like you don't belong to yourself anymore. So if I would have kept that all inside, if I had never talked about it, willing to trust somebody to talk about it, because I've always felt if I actually told people what's going on inside my head, they'd probably lock me up. Thankfully, that didn't happen. The reaction I got when I first talked about this with a therapist is, she just acknowledged and validated, no judgment whatsoever. And then we had to talk about how are we going to counter these thoughts? Because if I didn't counter those thoughts were always going to give me permission to do my eating disorder behaviors and just self-destruct. So yeah, it's just getting it out of your head and how are you going to counter those? And there's a variety of ways to do it. Just got to find what works for you. But it is challenging at first. You might not believe the positives versus the negatives at first. But know that you will get there. It is possible. So,
the points that I'm really hearing you talk about is that within your own recovery, you first had to take a look at the roots. Where did this start? Where did this come from? And so oftentimes it's our upbringing, and it's not necessarily looking to blame or shame anybody. It's just to understand where this came from. And how did, because we typically are not just born thinking negatively about ourselves and self-rejecting. That gets developed from experiences. And sometimes that's from families, sometimes that's from school, sometimes that's from undiagnosed depression or mental health that becomes controlling us. And then the disorder, the eating or the anorexia or the eating disorder then becomes the symptom of really what's underneath all of that. And the word that I think that I use in my own clinical practice and that I want to hear, what I'm hearing you say is you have had to challenge your mistaken beliefs.
Absolutely. Yes.
Those weren't accurate.
Yeah.
And I actually give my clients encourage a homework assignment, and that is to go through an entire day with a notebook, or these days now your phone, and write down every negative thought and message that you've given yourself that day, and tally as well. If it's the same one, tally it, see how many times, and then replace it with a more positive affirmation. Like, if I failed an exam, that doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It means that I failed. You know, it's I failed, but I'm not a failure. And so just replacing it to be more accurate. And so also, Kelly, what I'm hearing you say is that you've learned how to take kind of your wise, healthy mind, and that's in charge, rather than the pain and the mistaken messages, voices as you describe them. And I would imagine everyone on this podcast is, we all have our negative thoughts. All of us do. And I think it's a challenge for all of us to stop them and to challenge them, because we want to be our best friend, our best coach, not our worst enemy. And I always say, would I allow anyone else to speak to me like I'm thinking about myself? And the answer should be no. And so why would I allow myself to say that to myself if I wouldn't allow anyone else? So that's, it's about the core of someone's emotions, their feelings. And boy, you have done a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. And like you said, it was a way to cover that pain that I didn't know what to do with. It just had been under the surface for so long. Being a perfectionist, and you could probably even talk about all the different thinking styles, the catastrophic thinking, the black and white thinking, just how that all plays a part in perpetuating the behaviors as well. But yeah, anorexia and the self-harm was definitely my outlet for pain. I didn't know how to communicate what I was feeling with words. It was a release for me. While it was a very maladaptive one, it did provide that release, because I always felt like everything was boiling up to the surface and I'm just going to explode. There's just something I need to do. And the eating disorder helped with that. The self-harm helped with that. But the problem, of course, is it wasn't solving the problem. These emotions were just going to resurface and resurface and resurface until I decided to deal with them and deal with my painful memories. Because it's hard to believe this, but I felt like if I talked about it or if I acknowledged it, it's almost like the world would explode. So that's why I had to bury it. But you can only bury stuff for so long, and it can resurface, and unfortunately in maladaptive coping ways.
Right. So Kelly, as we start wrapping it up, of course, we have an audience that we may be speaking directly to, someone who may be in their dorm room, someone who may be in their bedroom, apartment, really struggling with this, and they've never talked to anyone about it. What can they do? What's their first step to get help?
Yeah. Yes. First, go to somebody you trust, whether it's a friend or family, just saying that you need help. Because I feel like you just can't go through this alone. And they can help you get that professional help. I just think that's just so important, with how far we've come with eating disorders and treatment therapies and things like that. Professional help is absolutely key. Reach out. You have the CAPS there at St. Cloud State. We have Centricare. We have Central Minnesota Mental Health Center. We have all these outpatient facilities that are just wonderful with helping with people with eating disorders, both the mental and the food behavior part. It's a multidisciplinary approach with eating disorders. And I always give this advice too, because it took me a while to find the therapist that I could connect with. So if the first person you reach out to, you're like, oh, this just isn't a good fit, don't give up. It's not uncommon to maybe go to a couple therapists before you find that person that you can click with. But do seek out professional help. There's also the crisis line here in St. Cloud, which you can call 24/7, and they can also direct you to resources. But yes, do reach out. You are not alone. I can assure you that. Yes.
Yes. And of course, as we always do, as part of our podcast, we're going to provide resource information on our social media pages as well. Last one before we end. So let's say you have a loved one, a friend, a family member that you're concerned about who may potentially be struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder. As an ally, what do you suggest? Because this is touchy.
Yeah. And that was actually something I came up against, especially with my family. It's like I was the elephant in the room. They knew there was a problem, but nobody ever talked to me about it because I feel like they probably didn't know what to say. So we often talk about do's and don'ts, or we did in the support group, especially if somebody who was a loved one of somebody that was suffering from an eating disorder. I had this handout that was do's and don'ts, and basically what the do's were is just come from the direction of concern, and encourage professional help, have the honest conversations. That's just so important, because some things that you can't do is ignore it. It's not just going to go away. It's on its own. You can't ignore the problem. You can't guilt the person saying you're just causing so much pain and disruption to this family, et cetera, et cetera. Don't control or threaten the person, because that's not going to work. It's going to backfire. I know one thing I would hear that was not helpful, people would say, is when I say, oh, I have an eating disorder, I have anorexia. There were people that would say, oh, I wish I had your problem. And I was just like, oh my gosh, no, you don't.
Right.
But yeah, but if if there's somebody in your life that does have an eating disorder, don't be afraid to have the honest conversation, how concerned you are, and that you're there to support them, be there to talk to, even if you don't have the answers and you're not a therapist or a professional. There are things that you can say that won't push them away or turn them away. But yeah, just come from that direction of support, that you're there to listen.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you so much. That's such good wisdom, and clearly speaking from your heart, from your personal experience. Thank you for your vulnerability, your openness. Yeah, it's just, and thank you for doing the work that helped you get to where you're at, and the difference that you are and have been making for so many people. So kudos to you.
well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. On behalf of Active Minds, thank you, and we will continue to educate and support. Mm-hmm. Particularly this struggle that lots of people go through, both men and women. It's not just a female issue, and it's not a weight issue. Mm-hmm. This is an emotional issue. So thank you, Kelly. And Active Minds will keep in touch.
Absolutely. I would like that very much. So
all right, you take care.
You too.
Right. Bye-bye.